Good Lauren.
Good morning, John.
How are you?
I'm fine. Had to figure out how to find the unmute button.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where is that button? Where are you at?
I'm in Frisco, north of Dallas.
And we're got another rainstorm here in California.
Oh,
It's like
hey, Rippin.
very, very cold spring so far.
Yeah, well, then I've got a place in Upper Michigan, and the Christmas time, the grass was still green, and the lake hadn't even frozen. But now they're getting socked with snow.
Yeah, I heard something about the polar vortex had changed direction or something like that, and it meant a lot of cold weather coming or something.
Wow.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon.
Hey, Rippin.
Hey,
Good morning. Hey, Rippin.
hi.
Craig indicated he was traveling, so he may be able to join a little late, but was going to probably stay on mute.
Okay. We'll wait a couple minutes here before we start talking. Good morning, Sabrina.
Hi, good morning.
Where are you from?
I'm from Miami.
Miami. You're on the East Coast.
Yes,
Uh,
East Coast. Yes.
is it spring yet? Yeah, I'm looking out. I'm looking out my window, and there's a bunch of trees that are flowering here in California, but it's like 50 degrees outside or something.
Oh, wow. No, it's pretty hot out here.
Ah,
Yeah, it's a weird weather here, right, Lauren? It's crazy.
yeah, it's a little crazy. It's like um, I'm used to having rain and stuff, but it's just cold rain, which is just different.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Which company are you representing, Sabrina?
I am with Mangrove Contracting.
Okay, nice.
So why don't I go through the first couple of slides here? Most of us know that the regional summit's happening in Lisbon later this month. And you can see here some of the details for that. There is still time to make plans to travel there if you would like. Some of the topics that are highlighted there are these: DC sustainability, artificial intelligence, security, data protection, power and cooling, sustainable computational infrastructure, and then stuff related to EMEA in particular. I think this serves as a really interesting transition to the topic of the Telco Project Charter. So some of the stuff here is clearly related to power, cooling, sustainability, and artificial intelligence. And I think some of those are some of the areas when we look at some of the features related to the telco charter, that we need to consider those as sort of interesting things that come out of Europe, but in general, there's a lot of interest around the world in these particular kinds of topics.
Yeah, and I like they have put the EMEA deployments topic. That's becoming important because to really see how the solutions are being deployed. So that's a good one.
Yep. So I don't know. Anybody know whether or not the keynote speaker who's the keynote speaker for the session or for the conference? I haven't looked at that stuff quite yet.
I haven't checked. I'm sure they know it, right? Probably I haven't checked the website.
So you can find more information, at the OCP site about, the overall program for the conference. The key thing I wanted to talk to you about was the charter for the telco group. And that would include the charter, kind of an overarching charter for both the telco group, telco project, and also the sub-project, which we call EDGE, which is related to edge environments or edge functionality, especially for telecom and carriers. So if you actually go read through the charter document, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's kind of related back to how the group interacts with the broader OCP community. I pulled out the stuff that's kind of more specific to the telco project as focus areas. And this really comes down to a couple of things. One is this slide here that says key project focus areas. And the second slide has to do with more environmental and deployment environments, which are obviously different for a lot of telco equipment. So this is the current one. There was A through I is part of the key project focus areas. I included another one down at the bottom there that had some specifics related to telco from another part of the document. And I think sort of when I read through this, it looked like most of this stuff still applies, but back to the question of the topics of sustainability or AI ML, the question really is, do we need to update this key project focus area to include kind of that, current information that wasn't really there when the charter was formed several years ago. Any comments before I continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point you're bringing. I think a lot of it is also, we probably, it would be good if there are some folks from the telco side, on the operator side who probably, if they have some new metrics, right, that they're governing under the sustainability piece of it, right? I know, lot of the cloud providers are doing it for sure. But have you seen any operators like the big ones talking about specific metrics that they want to accomplish for existing infrastructure and how it needs to be transformed to meet those goals?
I'm a little bit conflated about that. My experience has been that they'll talk a lot about power consumption and power savings and stuff,
Yeah.
but they're not when push comes to shove, and they start buying equipment, they really don't care about it all that much. Um, and I think also, some of the technologies that are coming forward in terms of liquid cooling or immersion cooling. I think in the telco environment, those are pretty pretty spotty from a demand point of view, right? Because these guys are mostly not data centers, and even central office are still pretty much, they're higher temperature range environment, but there's still a presumption everything's kind of air cooled, right?
Yeah. And I think for them, for most of them, what I've felt is like the specifications we had around DDC or EMUX, right? Or even some of the edge platforms, right? The enhancements that the chips are getting, and of course the recent enhancements with interconnects, right? And the savings that they're getting, right, from these enhancements, I think is sufficing the budgets that they need for sustainability versus the cloud providers are a completely different game. But I think for the operators, probably, just following the innovation track in terms of adopting new chips and new technologies would suffice their goals, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those products coming into the telco space are actually driven by the ASIC vendors, right? Broadcom in particular, in terms of what those products offer in terms of functionality and such.
Yeah.
Hey, Lauren, I have a quick interjection and question. This is Stefan Wolf with Mangrove. This is our first time dialing in on the call, but just a question to kind of understand what the scope, or I guess the fence line is here when we're talking about the charter. When we're talking about telco, telecom and carriers, are we delineating where OCP stops? Is that at the rack level, or are we also talking about the hardware that's actually going on the tower itself? Because when you start bringing in like open radio access network protocols and things like that, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think are hot button issues for a telco, and I just don't know if that fits into this charter.
So I think the charter for the telco group was kind of, I would say, everything that's not data center deployment or enterprise deployment, especially controlled environments where humans are present, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the basic delineation, and I think there's enough leeway to include all sorts of different deployment environments and products to support that, and technologies to bring to that.
And I think also the when you look at the lines are getting blurred, right, as to what is telco, what is edge, what is data center, right? And that's why I think some of the topics in the edge, it kind of spans across the enterprise edge, all the different edge variations, all the way into telco, and also the telco how they're deploying, and using data center technologies. I think the lines are getting blurred also a little bit. I think.
Where it's getting complex is with the edge side. People are really kind of looking for this ruggedized aspect, which is traditionally kind of come out of the telco world, but then from what we're seeing with on the edge sub project, there's a lot of other use cases that don't really tie themselves back to telco, but are really requiring kind of this hardened environment aspects to things that you don't have in the normal data center.
The hardened environments are clearly part of our charter for products, and I was going to say, OCP fundamentally is is hardware oriented, right? So a lot of the contributions are hardware products, and then or enabling supporting software structures is what I would say. So, and I agree with your comment about the edge. So the edge means something different if you come at it from a traditional telco perspective. If you come at it from the point of view of quote cloud data center quote edges, some of those edges for the cloud data centers actually are in POPs, right? Or central offices, places where it's not quite a data center environment, it's a more of a central office environment, which we know has different requirements, although it's still a controlled environment. But I know when you talk to cloud companies, they talk about the edge, and their edge isn't the edge out on the cell site towers, right? It's their edge is in the POP someplace where they're co-locating equipment or
right.
And
Yeah,
the other dividing line is one that's noted here, which is products that fit the 19-inch EIA rack or open rack kind of mechanical constraints, and those that don't.
Well, and one thing too, Lauren, that we're kind of seeing from on the edge side is this desire to look at this DCMHS, which is kind of these modular connectors and things with like expanding stuff with motherboard, kind of or daughter cards kind of thing. And I was kind of wondering, like, would we do that on the edge, or should we do this at sort of the whole telco level here to look at this kind of this blending of DCMHS with things that are happening on the edge? And give you kind of an example of where this fits in is we've got one participant, he's looking at needing to swap out CPUs. And so like in some markets, he wants to have an ARM CPU. In other markets, he wants to have an Intel. And I think in other ones, maybe a Chinese driven CPU. And so rather than kind of have a completely separate chassis and sleds and that kind of thing, that you would kind of have these other modular connectors to just kind of swap out that component. And so that's where it starts to kind of blend in with some of the other work that's going on with OCP as well.
Yeah.
The DCMHS track also is doing that modular aspect, and then the question becomes how do you make it accepted or inspired? And I think that's where, if you look at I think probably EdgeCore and Supermicro, all those folks are creating these systems, right? They're using the module design for their own internal efficiencies, but ultimately I don't know how much they want to do in the field, right? So they're just the actual system probably happens with all the requirements in these tracks, and the concepts are being incubated in other tracks, I see.
Yeah, well, like the kind of the challenge is that are the DCMHS specifications, are they the weak point from a telco hardening edge perspective?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
wasn't, they weren't really designed to be in these
Correct.
organized environments. And so the question is, can you just lift them as is? Are they, do we need something smaller? Do we need something more ruggedized? Something that maybe clips down or somehow secures it down better? Those would be, I think, maybe
Yeah,
kind of
and that definitely fits in the charter, right, for us to look at it. And that's why I think we were talking about, can we come up with some kind of, I think the DCMHS folks are asking what are the requirements, right, to your point, John. So yeah, I think customizing it to your point and probably fits definitely here, right?
Yeah, because I know there are several vendors that are, they've kind of taken stuff and based it on DCMHS, but they've done things slightly differently. And it seems like maybe it would be good to have an official OCP way to do that.
Yeah. So
the question is, do we do that at the telco level, or should we do that at the edge sub project level?
So let's see. So I think it turns out that, the telco side of things, telco project, almost everything that's been contributed is like full standalone switch products, right? There's a little bit of modularity there, but not much. The Edge chassis platform is much more modular, so it seems to make more sense to have that discussion kind of at with what the current Edge chassis offers. There's certainly already some modularity there, and the kind of question is does what they're doing overlap with what has already been done in the Edge or not?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we'll talk to and see if we can get the DCHMS group to come and give us a presentation, in one of our meetings about what they're doing, what they're thinking, how they're going to move forward, and see if it makes sense to try and leverage that or not. That's kind of more on the question of reuse, which is actually one of the values of OCP, right?
I think who asked the question? I think it was Steve, right? I think Stefan asked the question. I guess the other part of the question was what Open RAN, right? I think was what were you asking,
Yeah.
Stephen?
Yeah, so we have, thanks for bringing it back to the surface, but the we have clients that are deploying technologies with Dish and AT&T, and there's a lot of conversation on the carrier side specifically about what O-RAN needs to look like and how to the complaints about what spectrum they're using and how the O-RAN works into it and people sharing spectrum and I just don't know if that fits in here too. I just know that that's what's being discussed at the carrier level, especially when they're talking about fighting for BEAD dollars right now. The fund. So like that's
Yeah.
relevant topics in this
I mean,
space.
we have been talking about last mile, right? And there are so many different last miles into what Lauren was saying. We've been always talking about the traditional last miles, and then of course there are new last miles, like you said, right? I mean, not new, but variations of the last mile, like you said, with the 5G and CBRS, and then of course satellite also was a conversation we were having, right? And the question was, how does that impact the design of the infrastructure, right? And I think definitely the Open RAN contribution is one of them, right? Which is deciding the radio, and there are implications of how that gets groomed onto the edge, right, from a compute perspective. And then if there are any implications on the network interfaces like eCPRI, right, or any FPGAs that need to be done to make it more efficient for transporting that for the hybrid environments. So I think all those probably, again, like I say, I think these are all under the umbrella of at a high level. When you talk about even cloud is what telco was before. Now, of course, telcos never did anything. That's why we have the hyperscalers, right? So everything originated from the challenges that telcos couldn't really handle, right? So I see this also, like, we got to look at those issues, right? Because it all is in the intersection of last mile, options for the last mile, and how that gets packaged, disaggregated, and then how does it get transported ultimately.
Yeah, because I think when we're looking at on the screen point C, the multi-tenant hardware, I mean, I think that's a critical part of it. If we're gonna break down, and go and make us what I'm gonna call sub-charter almost, to the greater OCP, ecosystem, I think that those are relevant topics, and we look at, later this month talking about Open RAN. I mean, that it's a topic that I think is worth discussing. I'm not saying I have the answers, but it's just something that I think deserves a place here in this conversation. So it sounds like it's there.
And there was a subgroup created for that. And I know there were conversations of making it part of this or keeping it open. I don't know where we settled on that.
So the one part of the whole access network or mobile network that hasn't been in OCP until recently is the actual radio units, right?
Right.
So there's a project called Evergreen that came into OCP Eventually, it may become a sub-project of the telco group, but right now it's a standalone effort because the OCP management wanted to have a big focus on it. They had a couple of people that wanted to lead that group. So there is an evergreen kind of open radio unit effort underway. And that's, you know, actually that's back to the focus of, you know, open compute as being, you know, fundamentally focused on hardware. So it's like the last piece of the mobile access network that wasn't open, right? We've had products that are, you know, cell site routers or products like the edge chassis that were designed to actually host the DU, BU, or DU, CU kind of hardware in some capacity. And I think one of the, as another side question here, part of what we've talked about is, you know, since we have that platform for DU, CU, edge compute deployments or whatever, you know, what's the effect of AI on that in terms of initiatives on our part to include any GPU capability in that platform, or is there something else we need to do? How far out on the edge is AI ML hardware done or needed? How much of the AI ML stuff on the edge can actually run in kind of normal CPU cores?
Right.
As the, you know, the understanding probably is that on the edge, the role is doing inference and or, you know, data collection for getting growing the data set that gets trained someplace else, right? Probably.
Yeah. Well, also one of the aspects of this too is that another use case is augmented reality, virtual reality, and you know that would also require GPU usage. And kind of what you find is that to do those things, there's already so much latency inherent in the rendering part, is that you really need to move that as far out to the edge as you possibly can, because if there's any kind of latency or lag, it can cause motion sickness for, like, if you're working with a head-mounted display or something like that. And so what's kind of interesting with, you know,
I think we've heard about that with the current Apple glasses, right, or whatever.
yeah, or you know, the Meta's got the OptiQuest, you know, solution as well. You know, there's several things out there, and so
no, actually, on the augmented reality or stuff that's kind of AI driven, but it's not inference, right? It's a different kind of use of
yeah, exactly. Right. And you know, what's interesting is that the mashup of AI combined with augmented reality, and the fact that if you need to have these GPUs there anyway, those two scenarios build, you know, help make the business case for why you would want to put this, you know, in a more distributed way versus kind of a centralized way, or maybe even have the ability to flexibly move things from a centralized to distributed.
Yeah,
You know,
but all these use cases, you know, I don't see any telcos really driving those use cases other than just being the infrastructure provider. But a lot of the thought leadership and the use cases are the hyperscalers, right? And they definitely, you know, I don't know how much they'll definitely put in the regions, their availability zones, which are their edge versions, right, that they have for their data center. And of course, there are some, you know, they have distributed edges. I think Google has a product called, what do you call it? Google Distributed Edge, right? Or something like that, which is a version of data center that you can bring on premise. And it's, you know, and then the question becomes, is there an opportunity to have an open system for that opportunity? But it's so customized, you know, the whole stack. Even though you can bring your OEM hardware, but it's still the hyperscaler is controlling, right? Whether, I think you were mentioning, Stephen, the dish, right, use case as an example, which was AWS Outpost, right, being used with was it Mavenir, or who was the DU provider for the dish use case, right? So I'm just trying to see, how, what's the opportunity in terms of OCP to put a system together, and who would be really, in for it, for that whole system.
Right.
Yeah.
It's understanding where exactly the market is today, and just being, not being tone deaf to what the actual functional needs of the market today, and the, our aspirations moving into tomorrow look like. So
yeah, 6G. So 6G. Some of the scenarios are this, XR and AI, and a lot of the algorithms are going to be AI driven. So that's going to kind of require that you need to start moving these things further out.
Yeah.
yeah, until we can
But
push
did
the
you put
processing
it?
power to the actual device itself, it's going to have to live as close to the top of the tower as possible, whatever, wherever that tower lives.
Yeah. So that's kind of the question. Does this fit in the edge thing? Do we do this in the telco? I think we definitely have to do this in edge. The question would be, does this come as kind of umbrella things coming out of telco, and because edge is a sub project, or do we just, telco has absolutely no interest in this whatsoever, and we just do this in the edge?
Well, I think, so what I think is that the telco charter includes the edge. And I think the edge charter is just more specific to that that idea, right? So I think it's worthwhile having a discussion both places, and documenting, what the overarching focus areas are and principle, even if part of that's taken up by edge. I think, yeah. And I guess, from a practical point of view, one of the questions comes to my mind is, so one is, what does edge and the deployment environments mean from the hyperscaler cloud operators versus the telco operators? That's a clear division. What functions are they trying to provide at those deployment points?
Well, it's starting to blur, because now you have this cloud RAN things as well, and so that's kind of being driven from a hyperscaler perspective, but then they start to house some of this telco things.
I also have this funny question, because I know, just as an example, so the BNG functionality that telcos have for managing customers. So even AT&T moved a lot of that into the Amazon cloud, right? You sit there and go, okay, so these are the cloud services that Amazon are managing, kind of the customer interactions and such like that. And that's all good and well, but it's more of a control management function. It's not kind of the transport path for the real, the data that's being exchanged over a mobile network.
Yeah, it's a workload. For all purposes, just a workload.
It's just a workload. Yeah, and it has some requirements and stuff like that. But that particular workload gets paired with a whole transport network, right, of more traditional, access aggregation kind of switches and stuff. Some of which have, a lot of traffic engineering and QoS requirements and all sorts of stuff that's, very specific to a metered telco environment, of which the cloud operators that are doing AI/ML, they don't care about that at all, right? In some sense.
But then there's these kind of scenarios, though, where if you start to put some of your things in cloud, and then you still maybe have some dedicated facility, you could move functions back and forth, right? So the goal would be to get to this cloud native approach, where things are done in containers, and where it runs in the container, you can run that container really anywhere. It kind of starts to break down this idea that a telco is a box, and these functions reside just in this specific box. Theoretically, you could be able to start to move those functions around.
And that's a discussion that existed before the whole AI/ML inference thing, right?
Yes.
You take that discussion about moving all that sort of stuff around just to get your mobile network to work, and then on top of it you put this AI/ML desire or need, and that kind of defends how we ought to go look at things, I think. So Stefan, go, come back. Comments on what's sort of been shared here the last few minutes.
Yeah, I'm just clicking through while I listen to what we're saying here about, and I think a lot of the question that I'm seeing rise to the surface is what's the relationship between the Edge charter sub-project and the actual telco, because everything's starting to blur when it comes to like we we're just saying, like Ruben just said, it's about the workload, right? Where is the workload being processed and what standards are we trying to hold each other to inside of that bucket that we're putting it in. So I think we probably just need a little bit more input from the actual providers or carriers themselves as to what the this what we're going to call that the transition from 5 to 6G, which 6G we're still years away from that being a reality, but kind of setting the stage so when we do come back to do what will be an updating to the charter itself, moving from 1.0, which is where we're right just there, right to 1.5, just making numbers up. That we've set the stage to be ready to adopt that transition, because I mean, I don't have to tell anyone on this call, like the leaps and bounds that the whole industry's made in the past 12 to 18 months, what's it going to look like in 12 to 18 months from today? So it's setting up the charter in a way that is respects where we are today, but also is 100% aware and cognizant, verbally cognizant that these are standards that are going to adopt as the industry continues to adopt new technologies and standards. I just introduced the ORAN piece because I just know that's going to continue climbing higher and higher, especially as we're all fighting for more. Governments are hoarding, in a good way probably, spectrum because they don't want to keep giving it to commercial entities. But there's going to be a point where either we start sharing spectrum between all the carriers, and then we're going to have a real conversation about what that hardware needs to look like to support a multi-carrier, multi-tenant, quote unquote, architecture and infrastructure. And then how do we stay ahead of the curve there, because it ultimately, this isn't news to this group, but we're wasting effort if we have 5 of the exact same antenna on one tower when you could accomplish the same with 2 pointing in opposite directions. So how do we limit the waste and up the efficiency of the whole network, carrier regardless of who's actually the carrier using it at that particular moment.
Yeah. It's confusing from a consumer point of view already, let alone from a industry point of view.
And then even more so from the charter writer's point of view, people on this call. So I guess another question just as it fits in, how is this group, what's the goal as far as presentable document or deliverable ahead of Lisbon? Like, are we trying to have a 1.0 fully baked out, or are we bringing a 0.9 to the table?
Yeah, so we're not tied to Lisbon in any particular way and stuff.
Okay,
there's no telco track at Lisbon. I think last year in Prague, we actually had a telco track at Prague last year. But part of that is, as you noted, feedback or direction from telcos or telco or providers. One of the issues we have is that some of the telcos that were more involved in OCP have kind of set back. So both AT&T and Deutsche Telekom are not as involved as they used to be. So they used to, present us with specifications for things they thought needed to be created and developed and then consumed by them, and they're not doing that as much anymore.
is it a matter of bringing them back to the table, Lauren, or is it more than that?
You know, it's one of those things where it's like I said, um, I'm not sure. I don't know whether they're just sort of going back and saying, you know, we don't need it. We don't need open compute. We don't need open solutions for the products we're buying at cost competitive. So certainly part of the OCP effort of making open devices or open compute or you know open hardware, part of that's helped just pull down the prices from their OEM vendors, right? Be frank.
Sure. Yeah, there's a bottom line, consideration that we're up against also.
And telcos are more. They talk a lot about a lot of stuff on but then the people that make the decisions on what to buy, they're sometimes a different group than the technology leaders in these companies. So I mean,
it would be interesting. It might be interesting, Lauren. Maybe if we maybe not talk to the technical, the technical people at these companies, but also talk to the people who are having to fight the policy side of it too, because this is obviously a heavily regulated industry, and maybe there's information. As I'm just gonna keep referencing the Dish story because Dish has because of their leveraging of O-RAN and the technology they have, like they're in an interesting position where they need to pick up more, I guess, coverage, so to speak, to put it, very, very simply. And they want to, obviously to meet their internal governmental requirements, but they're up against a wall because the other providers, the AT&Ts and Verizon's, the Spirit, everyone else in the game, they don't want to share because they see that as a direct threat to their, market share.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
What we're seeing is that a lot of the times procurement would prefer to get, in these larger carriers, procurement wants to just deal with one vendor. And so if they're already having, say, a procurement agreement to supply their data center or, other parts of the organization, when we start providing them this openness where the software can just run on anything, they're kind of preferring to kind of just, buy the same stuff that they're buying for other things.
Right. It's almost like we're talking about transitioning to the cloudification of the actual telco hardware.
Yeah, but like basically standardizing on one common, that's where this could get interesting to start combining with some of the other things going on with OCP. Is that's kind of where we're starting to address, what you would need in the rest of your data center. And so, if this stuff starts to all now kind of paint a picture that it all kind of is, connected in some way, it would facilitate this buying pattern of just getting this, getting it from, yeah, I guess the term would be COTS, so common off the shelf server kind of idea.
Right. And then that by standardizing it in that way, and also by potentially distributing the load and the workload of multiple tenants, quote unquote, over less total aggregate, hardware, there's ultimately a cost saving somewhere, right? How you calculate that and how that works out is a different conversation entirely. But as long as
it's the spares and all that kind of stuff, right? So if I can start to come, not
but
have
first
to have
everyone on the same hardware first.
Yep.
I think that for me at least, that clarifies a little bit, like what are we trying to accomplish at a very, very high level? We need to get all of these major players in the markets to buy in to buying the same stuff, right? And then from there we can continue moving in that direction. And that partially requires us understanding what are the needs, the 5G needs, which I think we have a pretty clear understanding as an industry, right? Or industry professionals, like what are the things that we need today and where do we need to be tomorrow, and try to catch it before it gets purchased and drive dollars towards, maybe not one supplier directly, but one protocol, maybe is a better way to frame that. But who knows? I'm just the builder.
Yeah, no, I think the savings comes in more from the operational aspects, so that you're kind of doing the same process, the same contact people to simplify all of that versus where maybe today you're getting this hardware is coming from all these different vendors, so you've got different contact points and all that kind of thing. That's kind of where I think that they're looking to kind of squeeze out the savings is to reduce.
It's a great analogy. It's a great analogy I just thought of. Remember, 10 years ago, let's say, whenever you get a new cell phone, you'd have to specify what your carrier was, and they'd have their own specific SIM card and spectrum they use. Now you go by, I just bought my wife a new iPhone, and it's eSIM. You choose your provider, you plug in your information, you download the app, and you're rolling in less than 5 minutes.
Right. So it cuts down a lot of the operational overhead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Streamlines a lot of process up and downstream. And ultimately for the end user, whoever the end user is, regardless of where you're on the food chain, it becomes simpler, the process. You're still getting the same product. You're still getting arguably a better product. But you have to at some point, you have to be able to standardize it.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment about, part of OCP is standardizing things that multiple customers can buy and use the same stuff, right? And that's not just hardware, that's also enabling software or management interfaces or whatever.
Well, Lauren, to kind of bring us back, so you'd mentioned early on that Evenstar would eventually move under telco. Did I hear that correctly?
Still in the background and stuff, yes. I'm not sure if it's a firm plan or not, but I know that they initially wanted to do the open radio unit as a visible standalone new effort, sponsored directly by the incubation committee. I think maybe I'm not sure.
So would it be a fair assessment to say, like, maybe we should just do a cursory look at perhaps the requirements that would have, and that maybe what we need from Edge, and then since they would both be rolling up under telco, my thought would be that anything that they would share in common, that should be at kind of the telco level.
Yeah, my perception is the evergreen stuff is a good open solution for 4G and 5G. I think that they're going to have the same issue that we have, which is, okay, so you're talking about Edge, you're talking about mobile networks, talking about either radio units or equipment to support those radio units. The same discussion. What's going to be needed for 6G? I think they're going to have the same discussion because what they have right now is not that far, not that forward looking.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But maybe we have the discussion together, right? We should certainly cross or track it and make sure if they're having that discussion, we know what it is. But that would be my expectation is we'll both have the discussion. So I've kind of highlighted a couple things out of our conversation. One is, provider feedback for 6G, especially related to, what was it? XR.
Well, there's kind of two things. There's this 5G advanced, and then there's 6G.
5G advanced? Tell us about that. I haven't heard of that before.
It's it kind of starts to add some of the capabilities that would be coming with 6G, but without sort of more of the massive changes that you would need for kind of so it's kind of like an incremental step.
Is it mostly software enablement?
Well, so like potentially you could start to introduce these things like AI and XR type use cases. So it's kind of building on, kind of making there's like a step there to start doing some additional revenue generating capabilities.
Oh, okay.
To before, because then 6G would start to require, okay, this is like massive overhaul again to like the core network and all that kind of thing. So it's kind of like things that you could kind of do contained, but could start to so that's kind of where you're laying the groundwork.
Yeah, you hit
kind
on
of like,
the.
kind of like how
Go ahead. Go ahead.
5G was there was like the new radio part, and then there's the full blown 5G. You can kind of think of it as sort of like that kind of approach, but maybe not necessarily from a new radio, but think of like new use cases where you start to maybe bring in GPUs and things like that.
So maybe that's the alignment point where we try to get in lockstep for the 5G plus, where I'll call it whatever the nomenclature is, so that we're in the conversation and we can start driving discussion as we work towards the 6G, right? Because if we're not in the same ballpark as far as where the industry is going with them, which maybe we know that, I just don't know it personally. Like I think that maybe is a perfect intermediary step to catch it and drive for 6G.
Yep.
Good point.
So maybe just my suggestion would be should we just maybe have some high level things that we would add to the telco charter, if you will, to kind of say like it should be future leaning and look into other sub projects and look for common requirements that would kind of roll up under that. And maybe that's what we start with, and then as that evolves, at least we've kind of laid the groundwork to start to expand the charter a bit, but maybe we don't have all the details yet. Just a thought.
No, I'm hearing what you're saying. Maybe it needs to be more explicit in terms of how we coordinate with other subgroups or other projects related to this. So obviously one of those is the DCH or the modular stuff.
Yeah, DCMHS.
DCHMHS. Let's see. I don't think there's any group in OCP that's directly connected to mobile, right? Not 5G or 6G or anything like that. I think.
Right.
Which are more technology oriented, not.
Yeah, I mean, so like I was thinking from the edge side to maybe get somebody from DCMHS to kind of present just what they're doing. Yep. But maybe we should do that at the telco level, and then that way we can also assess at the telco level. Is this something? Have them present to the telco group, tell the edge people, hey, go join the telco group for this, and we're going to do it once and do it there, and then kind of decide.
That's a good idea.
There's also, just to put on everyone's radar, I mean, Tower Exchange Meetup Americas 2024 is in sunny South Florida. Come visit us in Florida, and we can try to get in front of some of these telco teams and figure out where the ball is and try to get some buy-in from them about being a part of this discussion, because I think that part of the sell to them too is, hey, you're driving the conversation as to where the industry is going. You have a vested interest in being a part of it. We're moving with or without you, kind of, nicely, obviously, but understanding where I'm looking at the panel discussion. First one of the day on Monday the 10th is forging a collaborative future for carriers, TowerCo, and government. I mean, sounds pretty aligned with what we're talking about here, right?
What's the name of the conference again?
I'll drop it in the chat right now. Tower Exchange Americas. So I just dropped it in the chat.
Okay.
So maybe we form a delegation and come down, descend on Miami, and try to figure out who are the people that are willing to participate in conversing on the future of what telco, tower, and edge, because it is ultimately edge. I think, John, that your point, and Ruben, you said the same, is that, you know, the lines are blurring aggressively. You know, the only distinguishing factor at the end is going to be what is transmitting the wireless signal, right? But everything from there down in the near future is going to look and feel the same, which will ultimately probably roll up in charter versions 2, 3, 4 across OCP. Will probably look and feel very similar until you get to the very, very minute detail of what your specific vertical requires. In this case, would be what's happening on the tower itself, the small cell, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I think you know the big delta that telco and everything underneath it kind of is bringing right now is this ruggedized environment that's
Correct.
different than a lot of the rest of what OCP is doing. But there's a lot of work going on in OCP that, you know, may need hardened requirements that, you know, would make it adaptable to what we would need under the quote telco umbrella.
And then on the flip side, John, as we continue to rapidly expand what we're considering data center space, edge space, I think that those hardened standards or protocols are going to probably bleed backwards back through the other.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Yes. Exactly. Yep. Well, because I mean, you know, once you have something that's already handling, you know, low, addressing power consumption and heat generation, that completely lends itself to going backwards into the data center, right? Because now if I can start to buy this stuff at volume, and now it's got, you know, requires less power and generates less heat, that's just a win for data center environments too.
Correct. If it's in a NEMA 4 or NEMA X box, is almost a rated enclosure is irrelevant. What's the tech that's inside of there that was driven by the telco vertical?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, hard drives. You know, it was really, the technology was driven by the PC, and it kind of made its way back up into, you know, larger data center environments and that kind of thing.
Correct.
Yep. Low cost pricing advantage.
Exactly. Well, I dropped my email just I think that there's a lot more to mine here, and we're running, I think, a little short on time, but I think that there's a lot here to work on. I think that finding someone that has real visibility into what the needs today and in the near future for some of those telcos that maybe hasn't been engaged yet for a fresh perspective might be the ticket to ironing this thing out. Like you said, John, creating a future oriented document that respects that this is going to adapt very, very rapidly as the industry continues to adapt.
Good suggestion. And I think I like your comment about, you know, the guys really dealing on the edge of the mobile network, you know, at the towers, at the radio units. It's not clear to me, you know, the big carriers like AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, and stuff like that. You know, sometimes their concerns about they have such broader concerns about their whole network, right? Sometimes it's hard to find the right people inside that are really dealing directly with the edge.
Right. Well,
So,
I think we're all pretty good on LinkedIn. We can dig around far enough. The question is, do they use it?
yeah.
So, you know, I'd like to say one thing. I think if you read the telco charter, it actually says things about things that are not yet
Yeah,
Craig is traveling. Craig, you're really breaking up. We can hardly hear you.
now we can't hear you at all. Okay, for completeness, so this was the second slide, which really had to do with more of this environmental, like all the kind of unique environments that providers and carriers need. And I kind of highlighted and read a couple of the key phrases and stuff here that direct this. So,
Yeah, I mean, reading this that you have bolded is key. The question is how how deep do we drill down, right?
Yeah.
How deep do, because we once
The
you
ori-
open a bag of worms, like how many worms are you going to unpack?
Yeah, the original, as you can read here, the original kind of conception was um, open to all different environments, but it's more driven by what participants in OCP, Telco, and Edge, what they contribute as products, right? So if they want to specify a product for, you know, central office, or they want to do one for outdoor cabinet, or they want to do one for, pole mounted, extremely environment, that if they make a contribution in those areas, we're open to all of that. We're not going to specify that. Although the last statement here is, maybe we document desired features and or requirements, right? So if we think that there's, some unique needs or some unique deployment environments, maybe we kind of think about specifying those as, here's this environment where, it's kind of a unique place. Here's the requirements for that. And I think of, especially if, some of this AI, AML stuff or GPU stuff, a lot of those chips they use a lot of power, right?
Right.
And so kind of going through and specifying where we think that those types of systems can live in terms of its deployment environment might help us all understand kind of the constraints on moving that technology out to these, from the really controlled data center all the way out to the edge, to pole mounted. Give us some guidance on where we expect that to happen or not. That's my only comment here.
Yeah, no, and I think you're kind of hit. There's 80. I'm gonna throw silly numbers again. 80% of use cases should be able to conform to fit into what we're going to call the OCP accepted / inspired products and applications, right? And then there's going to be those use cases that are hanging off the side of the mountain, overlooking Big Sur, like some like crazy pole that has to be mounted somewhere. Like that's a use case that you have to work with individually, but that's answering some higher level first principle need of connectivity or coverage that you can't answer for every single thing unless you can answer for the first principle, which is coverage or fast compute, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
So I think that there's probably some language that we can put in there for that too, that kind of, it's tough to prioritize because they're all tantamount, but being able to at least acknowledge the fact that there are sometimes competing needs that we need to be able to balance and at least be able to speak to, especially when we get to those edge, not literal edge, also theoretical or conceptual edge use cases where you're addressing a very specific issue and you're not going to be able to check all the boxes for now.
Yeah, and some of this stuff gets tried back to the new OCP process where they want sort of a generalized base spec for a product category, and then more specifics in other documents. Maybe some of this environmental deployment stuff we can put into a base spec, a base spec that kind of defines these different environments more explicitly, so we have that as a backdrop.
Right, like you said, yeah. Break it down by almost like generalized, environmental or spatial consideration, right? Like it's like if you're mounting on the side of a canyon road, it's going to be a different deployment than if you're doing a small cell in a dense metropolitan area, right?
Yeah.
So.
No, I find that all fascinating, and it makes a huge difference in terms of how you think about building products too, right?
Correct. Sure.
All right. Thank you. It was a great conversation. I've taken some notes here. I will figure out what to do with these notes, and perhaps send some communication, out to the entire mailing list for the telco group and the Edge group. I'll work with John on that.
Hey,
anyway,
John and Lauren, could you put me on the mailing list, because this is found you through the grapevine, and I thought this was interesting because of the work that we're doing. But we definitely like to participate, at least be visible on the communications moving forward.
Yep. Can certainly do that.
I dropped my email in the chat, so if you want, you can grab it there. You want to give me your email, I can pop it, drop it in, and I can send you an email directly, whatever is easier, because
let me drop
the
links. Let me drop the links to the project page, and you can sign up to the mailing lists from there.
That'd be great. Thank you,
That's
John.
probably the easiest way. So here's there. I just dropped the Telco project and then the Edge project.
Beautiful. Okay. I am clicking through as we speak.
And then there's also, if you'll see on there, it talks about the wiki. To check that out too.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, Sabrina is here on the call. She's also with us at Mangrove, so we'll both jump in and add to the list. And I'm serious. I think that it might be worthwhile trying to get into one of these telco conferences. I just know Tower Exchange, it's in our backyard. But trying to get a on the pulse with the industry before we go fully public on a Rev 1 or version 1, I think would be good in the long run.
Sounds good.
Awesome, guys. Thank you everyone for letting us join. This was very informative.
Great, thanks for joining, and we have monthly meetings, and look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.